All right, everyone. So I want to give you guys an idea as to what will happen in the Middle East in the future. This is my idea. This is what I am observing based on the things that I have read. And what I am going to prognosticate is not necessarily going to happen 100%. I'm not saying this as a prophecy. I'm simply saying this as an observation. This is just a mere rough draft of an idea. This is what I think is going to happen. I believe that Turkey is going to invade Israel, but Turkey can't just invade Israel for no reason. It needs a casus belli. Casus belli is an old Roman term. It means a reason to go to war, right? It means a cause for war. A casus belli goes back to ancient Rome. You can read about when Rome declared war on Carthage after Carthage invaded a Roman ally in Iberia or Spain, and the Romans got together in their Congress, and some Roman politician lifted up both sides of his toga, and he said, left this hand war, the other hand for peace, which do you decide? And everyone in the building said, war, let's declare war. So Rome went off to war against Carthage. So this is what a casus belli is. Rome needed a casus belli to declare war. Carthage attacked a Roman ally, and that was it. Russia had a casus belli. Ukraine is killing our Russian people in Ukraine, so Russia needs to invade Ukraine. Turkey went into northern Syria. Why? Because there are Kurdish terrorists there, and we have a war on Kurdish terrorists. So when you go to war, you can't just say, I'm going to declare war because I feel like it. You have to have a casus belli, a reason for war. So what would the casus belli of Turkey be to invade Israel? Something is going to have to happen for Turkey to justify an invasion. Turkey needs something to point to as a pretext to go to war. So what would that be? And this is what I think. And I've said this before, but I just want to re-explain this, re-articulate this. In Israel, you have the far-right Jews, the racist far-right nationalists, increasing in population. They are increasing in their numbers by recruitment because, well, all of the Palestinian terrorism gets people extremely angry. They become more nationalistic. You also have an increase in the numbers of nationalists in Israel because of the fact that the religious, the nationalists have a lot of kids. They're having most of the kids, while the moderate, more liberal Jews are having the least amount of kids. They have a very, very low birth rate. So anyway, you have the rise of the far right in Israel, the rise of the ultra-nationalists, the racists, etc., etc. And these people, they can have very, very nasty and vile takes. I mean vile, repulsive, evil, just terrible, terrible opinions. And I saw this myself in a video recently. There is a YouTube channel that is just dedicated to asking random Israelis questions. This guy, he runs this YouTube channel. He goes around the streets of Israel. He goes to Tel Aviv, Jerusalem. He goes to the settlements. He goes to the Arab neighborhoods. And he just asks people random questions like, why do Jews think they're better than everyone else? Yes, he actually has a video where he asks Jewish Israelis this question. And some of the answers are kind of interesting. Anyway, so there's this one video where he goes to this Jewish Israeli fruit vendor, and this guy looks clearly Mitzrahim. The Mitzrahim Jews are Jews whose recent ancestry came from the Middle East, as opposed to the Ashkenazim Jews whose recent ancestry, goes back to Europe, not back to, most Jews have genetic origins or genetic roots to the Middle East ultimately. But within the last 2 millennia or so, the Jews have been very much so broadcasted throughout the world, and you had a lot of Jews living in Russia, Europe for around 2,000 years or so, or something like that. I mean, Jews have been in Europe for thousands of years, and you had a lot of Jews also living in the Middle East, Iraq, etc., etc. So the ones who came from Russia, from Eastern Europe, from Central and Western Europe into Israel, they are known as Ashkenazim. The ones who came from the Middle East, they are known as Mitzrahim. Anyway, this guy, this fruit vendor, he is clearly Mitzrahim. And this interviewer asks him some question. What do you think about such and such, et cetera, et cetera? And this guy had the most vile, repulsive take. Really, just a very vile, repulsive take. He said something to the likes of, in the future, every single Jew is going to have 10 slaves, 10 Arab slaves. And my Arab slaves will be at my feet, etc., etc. I mean, really nasty, just vile, disgusting stuff.
הקדוש ברוך הוא ישלח לנו את המשיח בקרוב, ואז כל הערבים יהיו עבדים שלנו.
כן?
על כל יהודי יהיה 10 ערבים, עבדים שלו. חמד תנקה לי את הנעליים, פטמה תגעצי לי את החולצה, ככה זה יהיה.
וואו, אתה מאוד...
מה אני אומר לך?
כן? ואתה חושב שהגיוני ונחמד?
זה יהיה מעולה, פרפקט.
כן? איזה ידעת?
אני מרוקאי.
במרוקו לא היו יחסים טובים עם המוסלמים?
פעם היה, היום לא.
אז למה שינקו לך את הנעליים?
כי פעם הם היו בני אדם, כשיבוא המשיח הם יחזרו להיות בני אדם והעבדים שלנו.
מי שהכניס לך את זה לראש זה הכי נורא.
מי שהכניס את זה לראש זה הבית ספר, פה זה האוניברסיטה הפתוחה. הפקולטה למשפטים.
אז רגע, מי יכניס?
לא של אני בעד ערבים נגד ערבים.
אני מאמין בהכל. אז מה, אלוהים כל הזמן בודק אותנו עכשיו?
לא.
מה הוא עושה?
אלוהים לא בודק אותך.
מה הוא עושה?
פשפש, כל אחד פשפש במעשים שלו. תשמע, תעשה טוב.
הנה, חזרת למה שאמרתי מההתחלה.
אומרים בדת, בתורה, בתנ"ך, אומרים שבן אדם שלובש ציצית קטן, טלית קטן. אני לא לובש. בן אדם שלובש טלית קטן, כן? בכל טלית, בכל טיל יש לך 8 חוטים. על כל חוט יהיה לך עבד, בן דוד. על כל חוט. יש לך 8, 8, 8 ו8.
אבל זה לא בתנ"ך, זה תלמוד.
בתלמוד.
אני לא יודע אם זה בתלמוד, אני לא שמעתי את זה. אבל בתנ"ך זה לא כתוב דבר כזה.
בתלמוד, בבבלי, בגמרא, איפה שלא, אבל זה תורה. זה נכתב
And some other Israeli Jew overhears the conversation, and he butts in, and he tells this Israeli Jew, who is very racist, very vile in his way of thinking, he says to this guy, I just want you to know that your way of thinking, your mentality, your ideology is just disgusting. I find it absolutely repulsive and disgusting. This Mitzrahim Jew tries to butter him up with compliments, and he tells him something like, you are my Jewish brother, even if we disagree, we're still brothers, etc., etc. But these Arabs, they murder our people, they're terrorists, etc., etc. And the other guy says, listen, I understand, we have problems with the Arabs. They are Arabs who are terrorists. Absolutely, this is undeniable. But nonetheless, your way of thinking that you're going to have 10 Arab slaves shining your shoes is just disgusting. Yes, I will acknowledge that there are problems with the Arabs. But I will not go so far as to say that I'm going to have, 10 Arab slaves at my feet. That is just disgusting. And so they argued about it, etc., etc. The guy behind the camera asked this guy, where did you learn this? How did you learn this? Who taught you this? And the guy said, well, it's in the Torah. What part of the Torah? Where in the Torah does it say you're going to have 10 Arab slaves? To which the guy says, well, it's in the Mishnah, which is just saying it's in the Talmud. It's in the Talmudic rabbinic oral tradition. And the other guy says, that's not the Torah. And then the other guy says, the racist guy, he said something to the likes of, well, you're right, it's not the Torah. Technically, it's in the Mishnah, but we just say the Torah basically as a general term. We put it all under the general umbrella term of the Torah. And the other guy, he said, like I said, your way of thinking is disgusting, etc., etc. So this mentality in Israel is quite large. There are a lot of people in Israel who think this way, that the Arabs are going to be our slaves, blah, 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 blah. And as fanaticism grows, we can see this mentality expanding. We can see this mentality becoming more and more mainstream. So what eventually will happen, this is my prediction, what eventually will happen is that this fanaticism is going to explode. And you're going to have nationalist Jews, right-wing, racist Jews do something so vile, so tremendously heinous and egregious, so cruel, that Turkey will say that we need to enter Israel and protect the Arab population from these racists. And it could be something like a massacre. It could be the Jews taking over the Dome of the Rock and saying no non-Jews can enter here. Or it could be both. It could be a massacre or massacres. It could be going into the holy mosque, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and saying, this is ours, you guys can't come in here. It could be one or the other of these sorts of scenarios. It could be, or the like, right? It could be a scenario like this. It's going to be something so tremendously terrible that the Turks will say, we're the most powerful Muslim country. We need to go in there and intervene and protect our brethren, our Islamic brethren. And that would be their casus belli. Because Turkey just can't invade Israel just because it felt like it. It needs a casus belli, a reason for war. So it could be something like a massacre. It could be something like what would be perceived as the desecration of an Islamic holy site, like the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Or it could be something of both. It could be both or both and plus something else. Regardless, it's going to be something that would be used as a casus belli, to put it very simply, and that is what I think will happen in the future. Now, in the process of all this, in the midst of violence against Arabs, other Jews will intervene and say, what you guys are doing is terrible. Right? So let's say the nationalist Jews, they do a massacre of the Arabs, they do something very, very heinous, or the Israeli government does something terrible, and you have violent settlers or violent nationalists that the Israeli government supports, something like this. And what would happen is a whole bunch of other Israeli Jews will come in and say, this is terrible. What you guys are doing is really, really bad because it's going to cause more violence, and it's immoral, or it's immoral, depending on the situation. Because remember the conversation. The Israeli fruit vendor says, I'm going to have 10 Arab slaves at my feet. And the other Jew overhears it, and he is so repulsed by this opinion that he enters the conversation. He butted in the conversation to tell this guy, you are disgusting. The way I look at it is, this conversation is a microcosm of Israel, in the sense that you have Jews who believe in very, very racist and vile ideas, like I'm going to have 10 Goyim or 10 Arabs to be my slaves, or 20 Arabs to be my slaves, whatever the number is. And you have Jews who say this is disgusting. Now, we saw this back in the 1980s when the Israeli government facilitated the greatest massacre of the Palestinian people in the history of the Palestinian people, and that was the Sabra and Shatila massacres back in the 1980s, in which you had Lebanese Maronite racist, phalangist fascists go into the Palestinian refugee camps of Sabra and Shatila and murder thousands of people in a matter of about 3 days. Very horrendous. Just 3 or so days of just rape and murder and hacking people to pieces and really demonic stuff. That massacre was supported by the Israeli government. The Israeli government facilitated that massacre. They even put soldiers around the camps to make sure that the Palestinians couldn't flee. It was really, really horrendous. Horrendous. This is why I say I am not this gung-ho fan of Israel. When I saw the October 7th massacre, when I saw the videos of the massacre, and I read the details of the massacre, I said, this is horrendous, and Israel has every right to declare war on Gaza/Hamas. When I read about the Sabra and Shatila massacres, I said, this is absolutely horrendous, and what Israel did was absolutely evil. What very few people talk about is the fact that the biggest demonstration in the history of Israel was against the Israeli government for what it did in the Sabra and Shatila massacre. It was against the Israeli government for its role behind the Sabra and Shatila massacres. You can read about it. Around 1 million Israelis took to the streets to protest against Ariel Sharon and the Israeli government. Because these Israelis were so disgusted by what the government did. They were so disgusted by the fact that their government facilitated the mass rape and murder of these Palestinian people in Lebanon, that they took to the streets and they organized the biggest demonstration in the history of the modern state of Israel. So there is in Israel a huge divide, and that conversation that I saw is a microcosm of that divide. So what would happen if the ultra-nationalist far-right Jews do something heinous and egregious against the Arab population? They say these Arabs are terrorists, they're inferior to us, etc., etc., let's kill them, and they do some horrendous massacre. Or they go into the Al-Aqsa Mosque and they desecrate it, or they take it over and say no Muslims can come in here. What would happen is the moderate Israeli Jews will intervene, or they will express their remonstrance and their protest against this, and they'll say things like, this is immoral, or this is going to lead to nothing good, it's only going to lead to more violence and bloodshed. What you would see at that point is hatred towards those moderate Israelis. And that hatred will be so intense that there would be violence against those Israelis. And it would be something like what took place in the Judean-Roman War, the one that Josephus writes about. He wrote an entire book. The historian Josephus wrote several books. His most famous book is probably his History of the Jews, but he also wrote a book on the history of the Roman-Judean War, in which he was alive and in which he actually took part. And in this book, he talks about all of the battles that were fought between the Jews. Because you had one side of the Jews that wanted war with Rome, and they murdered the Jews who did not want war with Rome. And that was the other side, the Jews who did not want war with Rome. They just wanted to live their lives. They were willing to pay taxes. They just wanted to live their regular lives. They wanted nothing to do with war. And they were absolutely right. Because look at what war against Rome led to. It led to horrendous bloodshed, starvation, and 1 million Jews being killed, either being killed in the war or being killed by starvation, being killed by other Jews. Just absolutely horrific stuff. Just horror movie material. You can read the history written by Josephus. I'm telling you, it'll be like, as you're reading it, it would be like a movie playing in your head. That's how descriptive and graphic this book is. It's a very good book, and I recommend that everyone should read this book. Anyone who tells me that they're interested in the Bible, they're interested in ancient history, they're interested in biblical archaeology, I will tell them, read Josephus's book on the Roman-Judean War. It sheds so much light on the New Testament. It sheds so much of a light of understanding on the New Testament, and it gives you this tremendous insight as to how the world was when Jesus was alive, or alive on earth. It gives you this tremendous insight into the world that Jesus lived in. I'll just put it simply like that. And the Jews who wanted war killed those Jews who did not want war. The Jews who wanted to drive out the Gentiles from Judea and establish their pure Jewish state, they killed the Jews who disagreed with them. And so in the future, I think you're going to have violence between the Jews. So you're going to have, and this is just a summation of the situation that I see for the future. I could be completely wrong about this, but this is just, like I said, a rough draft of an idea. I think in the midst of everything, you're going to have, on one side, inter-Jewish conflict, so the radical Jews being violent and murderous towards the moderate Jews, and you're going to have Turkey saying we need to intervene as a peacekeeping force to protect the Arab population in Israel. And that would be just a way of saying we need to invade. That would be a modern diplomatic way of saying we need to put our army there and invade. Just like Turkey going into northern Syria was really a military invasion, but it's masqueraded under a war against Kurdish terrorism. And I think also, and this is I think this would be considered a more far-fetched opinion than saying that Turkey is going to invade Israel. And that is, I think that the Germans will also intervene. There is a woman who is considered to be Germany's top expert on the Middle East, or really the top expert when it comes to influencing German politicians on foreign policy in the Middle East. Her name is Muriel Asseberg. And Muriel Asseberg recently wrote that what could happen in the future is an international peacekeeping force entering Gaza to protect the Palestinians against the Israelis. And she also says that Germany could be involved in a peacekeeping force consisting of Germany and other EU countries in Gaza to protect the Gazan people. That's just another way of saying Germany could and should do a military invasion in Gaza against Israel. It's just another way of saying Germany should rise up again. And the way I look at it is, in the future, there's going to be a Fourth Reich. And it's going to be smarter than the Third Reich because they're going to be more careful with their language. But I think there's going to be a revival of the Reich. There's going to be the Fourth Reich. And if you read the writings of Muriel Asseberg, she's quite clear as to what she wants. I mean, she says it in a very diplomatic way, but she states that Germany should enter Gaza, protect the population, even if it undermines the security of Israel. And it's just another way of saying bring back the Reich. And that's the way I look at it. So the way I see it in regards to the future is inter-Jewish violence, violence against Arabs by far-right racist Israeli Jews, and a Turkish/international peacekeeping force entering Israel under the pretext of being a peacekeeping force, when the reality would be that they would just be there to invade. And that this peacekeeping force would consist of not just Turkey, but also the Germans as well. And remember, the Germans and the Turks were allies in World War I, and they're still allies today. When Germany formed as a new nation back in the 1870s, one of the first things that Germany did as a new country was make an alliance with the Ottoman Empire. So that history goes way back. And what's very interesting is that if you look at the rhetoric of Ariel Asseberg, or Muriel Asseberg, not Ariel. I'm thinking of the Little Mermaid here. Muriel. If you look at what Muriel Asseberg has stated within recent years, it's very interesting. She stated, for example, in an interview this year, that we in Germany she said that the problem with Germany when it comes to policy towards Israel is that the policy is dictated by Israel. And she says that the policy is dictated by our past. It's dictated by the emphasis on continuously talking about the Holocaust. So that anytime Germany wants to do a policy that Israel doesn't like, somebody accuses Germany of being a Nazi country, being anti-Semitic, and the Holocaust is referenced. So she says we are too much so dictated by our past. We need to just kind of leave the past behind, not let it control our policy, and we should make policy against Israel.
Ja, die Realität ist, dass man Themen besetzen möchte, dass man sich positionieren möchte. Und in dem Fall komme ich wieder zurück, zu unserer Art, mit unserer Vergangenheit umzugehen. Und warum kann denn zum Beispiel eine israelische Regierung Druck ausüben in so einer Situation? Weil wir sie zum Schiedsrichter gemacht haben darüber, ob wir denn sinnvoll mit unserer Vergangenheit umgehen. Ja? Ob wir geläutert sind, ob wir genug gesühnt haben. Und deshalb kann sie dann auch relativ stark bei sowas Einfluss nehmen. Und deshalb haben wir ja auch so große Probleme, nicht wir, sondern unsere Regierung so große Probleme, eine klare Position zu Menschenrechtsverletzungen und Völkerrechtsverletzungen in Bezug auf Palästina zu haben.
Aber die Abgeordneten sind doch alle schlaue Menschen. Die wissen doch, wie die Lage ist, dass die Israelis die Besatzer sind und die Palästinenser die Besetzten. Die kennen doch die Machtverhältnisse quasi. Das wird dann einfach ignoriert?
Nein, das wird überhaupt nicht ignoriert. Das wird...
Die müssen doch verstehen, dass man sich dann auf die Seite der Besatzer schlägt. Niemand erwartet, dass wir quasi als Deutschland jetzt die Unterdrückten, also die Palästinenser, auf deren Seite stehen und gegen die Israelis kämpfen. Das erwartet ja, glaube ich, niemand, aber die müssen doch, also es muss doch verstanden werden, dass man sich dann auf der Seite der, das wäre ja so, als ob wir uns auf die Seite der Russen jetzt stellen würden.
Aber es ist halt ein ganz anderes Verhältnis, ja? Wenn die Hauptintention ist, zu sagen, wir sind geläutert, wir, diejenigen, die für den Holocaust verantwortlich sind geläutert. Und wir haben der israelischen Regierung und ein paar anderen Institutionen die Macht gegeben, das zu entscheiden, ob das der Fall ist oder nicht. Dann können wir halt nicht gleichzeitig sagen, wir haben hier ein ganz großes Problem mit dem, was ihr in den palästinensischen Gebieten macht. Also wir können das schon sagen. Aber da kommt halt kein, wie unser Kanzler sagen würde, Wumms dahinter. Ja?
And when she says that our policy is too much controlled by the emphasis on the Holocaust, that is very much so paralleled with right-wing rhetoric. Right-wing rhetoric says the same sorts of things, that Israel controls the policy, that this emphasis on teaching the Holocaust has too much power over us, etc., etc. And the fact that someone like Muriel Asselberg would say this tells us that such an opinion is reaching the mainstream. And if you look at the numbers, a huge percentage of the German people are actually tired of hearing about the Holocaust. And Muriel Asselberg is a reflection of this. And not only Muriel Asselberg, but also the fact that the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland party, is one of the biggest parties in the German Bundestag, in the German parliament. And one of the leaders of the AfD, probably the most famous leader of the AfD, Mr. Björn Höcke, stated that he's basically tired of seeing the Holocaust memorials, and Germany is the only country that will build up a memorial of shame, a monument of shame, and us Germans basically need to go back to being proud of who we are, proud of our nation, and this Holocaust emphasis, this Holocaust fixation weakens us and paralyzes us as a nation. Yesterday, I read an entire speech by Björn Höcke, which he made back in 2017, before a crowd of members of the youth division of the Alternative for Deutschland. And in that speech, it's almost like old school German nationalism, the type of nationalism that you would have seen before the rise of the National Socialist Party. That's what it reminded me of. And in this speech, Björn Höcke basically says that the German military has been reduced to a joke. In other words, we need to get the German military powerful again. And he also states that this fixation on the Holocaust has paralyzed us. And people clapped their hands to the speech. It wasn't like people were nervous. It wasn't like people were thinking, oh my goodness, why is this guy saying this, etc., etc. No, he was greeted with applause. He was very much so favored, and he had a lot of positive reciprocation in this speech. So the fact that someone like Björn Höcke can become a famous politician, the fact that his party is now a mainstream party in Germany, is pretty concerning, and it's pretty scary. It tells us that this negative opinion of the Jews, negative opinion of Israel, is increasing. And it's increasing in the country that actually did the greatest massacre of the Jews in the history of the Jews. We're talking about, obviously, Germany. So you go back to Muriel Asselberg, and Muriel Asselberg, she states that we Germans have been purified of the sin of the Holocaust, and we have been and we are purified because Israel has decided so. In other words, our redemption, and she basically says it's almost as if we have not been redeemed. Because when she says, this dog is barking, driving me crazy. She says that when she said we have been purified, she said so in a very sardonic, very cynical way. And what she was saying was, basically, we Germans, it's almost like we're never seen as redeemed of the Holocaust, because anytime we want to do policy that Israel doesn't want, Israel will say this is anti-Semitic, or Jewish lobbyists will say, Germany has not learned from the Holocaust, etc., etc. This is anti-Semitism, or this is very dangerous, etc., etc. So she says our policy towards Israel is dictated by Israel, and ultimately the Holocaust is weaponized against us, to control our policy. This is what Muriel Asselberg stated. And she says it's almost as if we can never really be redeemed, and it's almost like our redemption, our cleansing of this past sin, can only be decided by Israel. So in other words, the Jewish nation dictates the policy of Germany. And it reminds me of anti-Jewish propaganda in the Third Reich, where it shows the Jewish octopus controlling the world. And it shows the Jew sort of manipulating and controlling the German, or controlling the Goyim, the non-Jew. And so you can see how that way of thinking that we thought was dead is actually coming back from the dead. It's resurfacing, just like Jumanji. Remember the movie Jumanji, when they put the board game underneath the ground, and then someone digs it up, and then the monsters all come back? The whole chaos of Jumanji is revived. It's kind of like that. So the way I look at it is, you have the Germans who are tired of hearing about the Holocaust. And as fixation on the Holocaust dwindles and people become more and more indifferent towards the Holocaust, it would be more easy to really go back to German nationalism. And we see this clearly with people like Björn Höcke, with parties like the AfD, which states, I should say, because I'm just talking about the AfD, I'm not talking about other parties. When you look at the AfD, this party, people in this party believe we should really stop this whole fixation on the Holocaust. We should focus more on the glories of Germany. In fact, Björn Höcke, in his 2017 speech, stated that there needs to be an inner renewal of Germany. There needs to be this revival in Germany, this nationalism in Germany. And he states that not only should there be this nationalism in Germany, we should also enforce this renewal. We should enforce this nationalism. So he wants to really recreate German society from what it was after the Second World War to a revived, renewed, reinvigorated nationalism, and it should be enforced, he says. So the fact that such a guy can become so popular tells us what? Tells us that as people stop caring about the Holocaust in Germany, it's very simple. As German people stop caring about the Holocaust, nationalism increases. And that's why they, for so many decades, since the end of the Second World War, teaching on the Holocaust has been so fixated upon. This is why it's so emphasized, because they know, once you stop making the Holocaust important, once you make it insignificant, then it's so much easier to revive nationalism. Because when you try to revive nationalism, what happens? People will say, oh, this is like Nazi Germany. But if nobody cares about that history, then people can look at the rise of nationalism and say, oh, this is fine. Well, what about the Holocaust? Oh, who cares? That's what makes it so much easier that's why it's so much easier to revive nationalism when you make the Holocaust insignificant. And that's why teaching on the Holocaust is so significant. So this is my prognostication on the future when it comes to Israel. You have the rise of Jewish fanaticism, you have Islamic fanaticism, and you have the rise of Turkey, which wants to control Israel. You have Germany, which is tired of hearing about the Holocaust, and you have people in Germany that want to do policy against Israel. And so just to sum it all up, I think, and again, I could be completely wrong, or I could be wrong on some details. I think what's going to happen in the future is Jewish nationalism is going to become so intense that some sort of egregious crime will happen against the Arabs, or some sort of a religious insult will be done against the Arabs, or both, a massacre and an insult against their religion, or a desecration of their religion, like, for example, taking over the Al-Aqsa Mosque, something like that. So something like this will happen. One or more of these things will happen. And the Turks will intervene, and before that, or around that time, the Jews will be killing each other. The nationalist Jews and the moderate Jews will be fighting one another. There would be a Jewish civil war. Turkey will intervene as a peacekeeping force, and Germany will also intervene as a peacekeeping force, and it'll be a part of a revived Reich. And Turkey entering Israel will be a part of a revived Ottoman Empire. And that's what I think is going to happen. I can be completely wrong about this. I can be partially wrong about this. But that's my prognostication based on my observation of current events and my reading of history. Anyway, those are my thoughts on that. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.